Big news for a Sunday, historic news as President Joe Biden decides he will not run for reelection. That's after he was almost assured of being the presidential nominee, winning his party's primaries and on his way toward getting selected as the official Democratic Party candidate for the 2024 election in just a matter of weeks. Now, though, Joe Biden says he is not going to run for reelection. Big news across the political landscape. Donna King is editor in chief of Carolina Journal. And Donna, this is huge, historic news.
It really is. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion in the last few weeks about whether this could happen. We've been hearing from our sources, and you and I talked about it a little bit on the debrief on Thursday. He's had some real, difficult conversations with the senior members of his party over the last 10 days or so, certainly since the debate. But they said that this week they were going to show him some hard numbers, and he kept saying it would take God Almighty to get him out of the race. Well, apparently there may have been some divine intervention getting him some of those polling numbers that were not good news. And there are a lot of Democrats that are saying that they disagree with this decision, that they don't agree with the senior level of their party, saying that, that Biden was a transformative president and that he should stay in place. But he's now endorsed Kamala Harris to follow him and to take that nomination. So what does that ticket look like right now? There's lots of speculation and will be probably for the next 24 hours.
Yeah, it's interesting that this news came out via a letter that I
Yeah.
think most people accessed via a tweet in the afternoon from President Biden, talking about the successes of his administration and thanking people for supporting him. But then he says in the third full paragraph, "It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as your president. And while it has been my intention to seek reelection, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term." So that answers one question, because there had been speculation about whether President Biden could even serve the rest of his term. He indicates in this letter that he does intend to serve the rest of the term. What did you make of that?
I think that's an important point to make because should he decide to step down, that means from now until November, Kamala Harris, the vice president, would then take over. And what does that mean for the vice presidential role? So that would be a very difficult situation to go into with such a pivotal election year. So at this point, Kamala Harris will not be running as an incumbent in November, but it does mean that they're going to be scrambling. I imagine they probably have been for the last few weeks to figure out what a second tier ticket might look like. Certainly, we've heard our own Governor Roy Cooper, could be one of that short list to run with Kamala Harris. Certainly viewed as something of a moderate on the current Democrat political landscape. He has been governor here, overseeing the state and the executive branch during a time where the Republican-led legislature has really helped the state survive COVID pandemic, hurricanes, brought the state kind of into the black with a strong surplus. It's, in 2008, North Carolina was in a situation of furloughing teachers. So certainly the last 15 years or so has been positive for North Carolina. I don't know for sure that it's, that Governor Cooper had a lot to do with that. A lot of that's the legislature, but it looks good. It's a good data point on his resume if he's going to join that presidential ticket.
Interesting. In the letter itself, President Biden says, "I want to thank Vice President Kamala Harris for being an extraordinary partner in all this work." But in the letter itself, he did not endorse her. I think that was one of the initial reactions as soon as this letter came to the fore. People saying, well, he doesn't say anything specifically about an endorsement. But then not too long after that, he did come out with a clarification saying, "I endorse Kamala Harris." Do you make anything of the fact that he did not write that into the letter, but then shortly afterward came out with the endorsement after there had been some speculation that, well, maybe he's not supporting her?
Sure, certainly. Well, I mean, I think it does indicate how difficult this conversation must have been with the president and the first lady and his extended, most senior advisors, that they were like, let's take the first step. Let's say, okay, this is not your time. You've served. You've been president. You've sat in that Oval Office chair. It's time to move on. They didn't say, okay, who's coming next with him. It tells you how hard this conversation must have been, and likely what a shock it was for the president, because it does appear that some of the reality of the situation for his polling numbers may have been kept from the president until the last, say, 10 days. It really seemed to come to a head when Donald Trump, the Republican nominee, survived that assassination attempt. And what would have been considered sort of middle of the road and moderate folks saw him bounce back from that and use it to fuel his campaign, that he may be unstoppable in this, certainly by a Biden ticket.
You mentioned the former president, Donald Trump, who is the Republican nominee, now officially the nominee after that Republican convention. He talked to the media a while ago before President Biden's announcement, said he thought that Kamala Harris would be easier to beat. And then after the announcement from the president, we saw from the former president, Donald Trump, some reactions saying that Harris is part of the problem and is already starting to pile on as if she would be the next candidate. What do you think Donald Trump and his team are thinking right now?
Oh, I mean, I think they're licking their chops, right? I mean, there's been some oppositional research, certainly on everybody that might have been on that short list, but we've seen the Biden administration send Kamala Harris out and having her take the stump and really talk about this. She was in Durham just this week. I think we'll see a lot more of her, certainly. And I think you also may see some of these Democrats who are good at fundraising kind of gel around her, because the goal right now may be just to protect those down ballot Democrats in key races like North Carolina's governor's race with Josh Stein against Mark Robinson, the Republican nominee. So they may be doing some level of damage control fundraising so that they can take those down ballot races. This is what Republicans did when it was clear that Obama might be get a second term. Republicans really turned their focus and their fundraising to down ballot races, taking state legislatures, taking governor's offices, protecting the judiciary. And we may see Democrats making that shift now.
We learned from this letter that President Biden says he will speak to the nation later this week in more detail about his decision. So we will get more detail about what he wants us to know about how he came to this decision not to run for reelection. We've alluded to this already, but you would have to think that the front runner for the Democratic nomination is now the Vice President, Kamala Harris. She was number 2 in this administration and is officially on the ballot as the vice presidential candidate. But that doesn't necessarily mean that she is going to be the candidate. We could see some interesting things happening at this Democratic convention coming up in Chicago if the Democrats decide to open things up, couldn't we?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, now we're getting really in those political weeds, Mitch. You know lots about this, probably a lot more than I do. But Democrats have what they call super delegates, and they've said that they weren't going to use them, and they have sort of a veto authority over regular Democrats, over delegates who come to that convention. Now, though, with Biden stepping down, there's probably a big shuffle to see which delegates are going to cast their votes for the main candidate. So it's going to be a really interesting Democrat convention. They're going to be having it in Chicago, which is the first time it's been in Chicago since Bill Clinton. Certainly a historic event.
Yeah, and you mentioned Chicago. People who are older than you and I can remember back to 1968 when the Democrats had their convention in Chicago, and it was a wild time. This was after Lyndon Johnson decided not to run for reelection, so there was a wild scramble to see who was going to be the Democratic nominee. I think the older Democrats are probably shaking their heads and saying, "Oh gosh, this reminds us of 1968 all over again." Donna, what's going to be the next thing that you're watching out for as we are paying attention to this quickly developing story?
Absolutely. We're going to be looking at who is on that short list. Certainly, is our North Carolina's governor, Roy Cooper, going to suddenly land on a national ticket with Harris or with someone else? We really don't know what could happen. We saw a tremendous North Carolina representation at the RNC, the Republican National Convention, this past week. And there is quite a bench of high power, certainly donors and fundraisers here in North Carolina. And maybe the national stage is where they're going to find that, because North Carolina's economy has proven to recover nicely. And that could give them some authority moving into that national ticket.
Donna King is editor-in-chief of Carolina Journal. You can find all of the North Carolina reaction and North Carolina elements to this story at carolinajournal.com. Donna, thanks so much.
Thank you.